Hi everyone, welcome to my author channel. My name is Monique, if you didn't get that already in the title. Okay, so people are always very curious about the authors behind the stories, and you know, I've got such an interesting background. I'm up from the performing arts side. I've been a professional dancer. I was a professional dancer for like 25 years. I did ballet, jazz, contemporary, mainly ballet. I'm also an award-winning choreographer. I'm a professional actress, so I'm still doing acting, and I don't do a lot of work, but because I'm focusing on my writing quite a bit. But if there's anything that you'd like to know about me, just leave a comment and I'll get back to you with your questions. Okay, so just a reminder that all my links to all my books are in the description box. Also, all my social media links are in the description or on my page. So if you just go to my homepage, you'll find all my links listed there. If you want to follow me, if you want to keep updated and find out a little bit more about me, I'm all there. Okay, so what I want to speak about in this video is how important it is to me to have characters that my readers can identify with. So even though I write epic fantasy and sci-fi where characters are a little surreal, you know, they're kind of beyond what people that we would normally find, or more accurately, they are in worlds that we don't know about, or we couldn't possibly imagine. It's important that the people and what they go through and what they feel and the way they think is like us. So, for example, and forgive me if I offend a few people, but this is just my personal opinion, okay? In the original Star Wars movies, okay, so my Swordbearers epic fantasy series, I was influenced by Star Wars to write the series because I wanted that kind of story. So my fantasy stories are not witches and wizards and magic and gnomes and fairies and things like that. It's more Star Wars, and it's very Game of Thrones. So it's got that like political intrigue. There's lots of war. It's very intense. It can get pretty violent, you know. There's a little bit of horror. There's a lot of supernatural in it because the protagonist is a supernatural being. Casey, my main character in my epic fantasy series, is also a supernatural being. And she goes on this journey of self-discovery, okay? But what she goes through in her life is very similar, is like every other human being. Sorry if you're hearing noise, someone's drilling outside somewhere. She goes through what we as normal human beings go through. We go through loss, grief, joy, new love, passion, adventure, you know, the desire for passion, for greater things, for expanding our worlds. And when I write my characters, it is very important that my characters go through what ordinary human beings go through. It doesn't matter what fantastical setting they find themselves in. So there can be magic and things happening around them. Like, for example, the Bagadons, that genre it's a horror, it's fairies, it's magic. So the Bagadons has that magical element because I love this idea of fairies and ancient creatures living in the forest, you know, and that there is magic and that there is that kind of element that exists on our world, but is maybe in a different dimension, you know, that kind of thing. So that's what the Bagadons is all about. But there's that horror element as well, because they're creatures that tear things apart, and that, you know, it's a bit gory and bloody and things like that. So, but the characters, the humans in the story, are very human, you know, so one or two of them might turn out to be magical. They might have powers and they might not realize who they really are. You know, I don't want to give too much away because I want you to go read the story. So in the Bagadons, you've got these people, these characters that are living normal lives. You know, the main character, Jim Sutter, he's a sheriff in a town. And he moves to a town because he was a cop in the city, and he gets shot, and his wife doesn't want him to be a cop anymore, but he loves what he does. So he finds a job as a sheriff in a small town, but the small town is very mysterious, you know, and his journey is him discovering what is going on in this town. And I'm sure, you know, it's got that kind of magical feel about the people in the town and how ancient the town is, because it's a very old town. It's like 400 years old. So when the settlers first come there, like what happens, and as a result, how the town evolves and the people that live there, you know. So it's got this whole magical element, but the people are living real lives. They are going through real experiences, love, loss, you know, evolution, story arc, character arc, you know, so that as a reader, you can identify with them, you understand them, where they're coming from. So as I am going back, because I'm a Gemini, sorry, I go off on like these tangents with my thinking. Coming back to Star Wars, what I didn't like about episodes 1, 2, and 3 is that it lost in episodes 4, 5, and 6, the original, what I call the original 3 Star Wars movies. There was an evolution of the characters in episodes 4, 5, and 6. Now, when we go back to the beginning of the story, I just found the writing, the script, okay, they weren't speaking and behaving like normal people. Yes, they were in a fantastical environment. Sorry, my cat's also mowing here outside the door, if you hear him. Yes, they are in a magical setting. They're in a Star Wars universe. They're in a different galaxy. Okay, that is not realistic to us as these Earth, as living on Earth. Okay, but they are real people. So the way that they speak, the way that they are meant to be speaking and communicating with each other, and the words that they're saying has to still be real. And for me, if I'm reading a story and the characters, I can't get my teeth into the character, I can't identify with the character, that's when I struggle to get into the story. And I have abandoned so many readers' stories because I just find the characters unrealistic. You know, there's nothing about them that's human, you know. So in Star Wars, when you've got the characters, the human-looking characters like Obi-Wan and Padme and, you know, and Anakin Skywalker, for example, you know, they're supposed to be these real characters, but just the way that they like spoke to each other, it was so unrealistic. And it just jarred me, you know. So even though I loved the scope of and the magic of the movie, the characters fell completely flat to me and I could not identify with them. And I say this, as I said to you, I don't want to offend anyone because it is really just my personal opinion. So for me as a writer, it is vital that there is character development. So if you are a writer wanting to write a book, for example, please be aware that your readers are real people and they need to identify with each character that you're writing, even if they are a magical character, even if they appear human, but they're not human. If they are, unless you want to create, for example, a person who comes into the story, and they kind of very cold, and that adds to the mystery of who is this person. They're very cold, and they're not, you know, and the other humans in the story, for example, are like trying to communicate with them, but they're not communicating in the normal human way. And then that stirs the imagination of your reader going, who is this person? Are they even human? Then, you know, from that side, then you create that mystery. But humans have to react as humans. They have to have human relationships. Their speech has to be natural, as you would speak in normal dialogue. So just be aware, writers, that you are not leaving out the truth of a character. So in acting, for example, actors they are in a what's the word? They're in an unnatural, an imaginary circumstance, but they are being real. Okay, so they're being real. As actors, we have to act realistically, but in an imaginary circumstance. Okay, so it's not a something that a story that exists or reality that exists, but we as actors, as the character, we have to embody the character to such a degree that the viewer watching the film or the TV, or the TV program, they feel like they are connected to that character. So when things happen to the character, they get emotionally invested. Okay. And it's the same with writing. You have to invest. Your readers have to feel invested in the character emotionally. Otherwise, the story is going to be flat. It's going to be dead. There's no communication between the reader and the character in the story. And that has to be there. You want to create emotion. You want to draw your readers back, especially if you're doing a series, however long it is, a trilogy, 6 books, 10 books, 12 books. You have to keep that reader invested in your characters. You want them to come back to the next book and the next book because you want to find out what happens to them because you're so invested in them. Okay, you want to see, like, does she die? What happens to her? What happens to her brother? What happens to her sister? What happens to her? What happens to the galaxy? What happens to the people in the galaxy? Because now I want to know, please, don't let the galaxy blow up. I'm just like throwing things out there because the reader is so invested. They don't want those tragedies to happen, but then as a good writer, you make them happen so that they cry, all right? So that they scream and they rant and they like get angry with you. And then as a writer, like I had a friend of mine, for example, I am one of my main characters in one of my books. I'm not going to say where it is because or which book it is because I don't want to give anything away. No spoilers in my videos. I kill off a main character. She was so upset with me for doing that. Okay, she was like really upset. She said, "How could you do that?" She said, "I was just crying and bawling my eyes out. How could you do that?" And you're like, what's going to happen to his partner now? Like, and what's going to happen? And and I said, well, read the next book and find out. So that is what you want to create, writers. Okay, so I'm speaking here to my readers, and I'm speaking to fledgling writers or even seasoned writers. Don't forget that you are your writers, your responsibility is to create a powerful world with real characters, even if they like freaking aliens, like green with tentacles coming out of them. They still go through, they are still characters with emotions, and you have to create something that feels real to your readers. Okay. Otherwise, they're going to lose interest. They are not going to come back to the next book. They are not going to want to continue reading your work, because if your characters are shallow and they're unrealistic, they're not going to be interested. All right. So, guys, just remember, this is me just sharing my personal experience, my personal journey with you, what I've experienced from my readers and the feedback I get from my readers, that unless I create what they want, unless I write stories that they want, they're not going to come back and read them. They're not going to want to come back and read them. So really look at your characters, focus on character development, focus on how they speak to each other and how they communicate with each other, because your dialogue runs the story. Okay, you can do whatever you want in the descriptive paragraphs and things like that, but if your dialogue and the relationships that you have between your characters if they're not strong, if it isn't strong, it's going to fall flat. All right, so this is just my opinion, but as I said to you, I've had the experience of it working, and all my books have very powerful characters and story arcs. That's what I personally focus on in my story, as well as creating creating worlds that people are just so drawn to, and that they've never imagined before. So that is my responsibility as a storyteller. And it's always so great when you get like a review, or you get people giving you feedback, readers giving you feedback that you've accomplished that. Okay, and that's what you want at the end of the day as a writer. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. Tell me in the comments what you think. You can completely disagree with me, all right, but share your stories with me as well, and just tell me. Please don't forget to subscribe. Press that subscribe button right now if you want to get more of these videos. And yeah, share with your friends. Share the links with your friends if you think that, you know, epic fantasy is for them. So enjoy, check out the links in the box, and I'll see you next time.